Hi, and welcome to Jules Vuotto's Photo Focus. In this video, I'm going to explain every control and feature and how to use the classic Nikon 35mm film camera, the Nikon F. The F was introduced in 1959 and was Nikon's first 35mm single lens reflex. The F was in production from March of 1959 till October of 1973, and over 850,000 were produced. There are many available on the used market. All right, so let's get started. Let's get these other cameras out of here. And we're going to start with the shutter speed dial. Okay, shutter speeds on the F go from 1 second up to 1/1000th of a second. And this shutter speed dial turns 360 degrees. I now have it set at a 60th of a second, and you will notice a 60th of a second is in pink. That is the top flash sync speed for electronic flash. You can use slower speeds with electronic flash. However, if you used faster speeds, which are marked in green, you would cut off part of the frame. Now, when this camera was introduced, flash bulbs were still in use. So you can also set this camera to synchronize properly with flash bulbs. So we really don't have to worry about that today. Flash bulbs are no longer used. I don't even think they're manufactured anymore. But just so you know what this ring is for, around the shutter speed dial is a ring. You lift it and you turn it, and you'll notice that window just above the shutter speed dial. We right now have it set for FX. Those other settings are for flash bulbs, so we really don't need to worry about that. Just make sure it is always set to FX. If you have it set to one of those other settings, you know, either the pink dot or the green dot or whatever, the flash will not synchronize properly. It must be set to FX. Okay, so in addition to the 1 through 1/1000th of a second, you also have a T setting. T stands for time exposure. Okay, so we're just going to cock the shutter. We press the shutter release. The shutter opens and remains open until we turn the shutter speed dial. You use that setting for very long exposures. We also have a B setting for bulb. Okay, you press the shutter release. The shutter opens. When you let go of the shutter release, the shutter closes. Also, you will notice, I'm just going to set this now to 1/125th of a second. Okay, you will notice a black dot that is pointed to the set shutter speed. When you release the shutter, that dot moves to the 7 o'clock position. And by noting the position of that dot, you can tell whether or not the shutter is cocked or not. Okay? Now, there's also one more thing. You will notice there's a small pin on the top of the shutter speed dial. That connects to the meter prisms, which we will talk about later. All right. So next to the shutter speed dial is the shutter release. You will notice that the shutter release on the Nikon F is not threaded in the center for a cable release. Most other cameras, it is. Nikon has their own style cable release, which the shutter release is threaded at the bottom. And the cable release just screws right in, and it is very secure. It is more secure than the other type of cable release. Also, let's set this to the B setting. Okay, so let's say you're going to, and here's a reason why you would use a cable release. One of the reasons why. When you use slow shutter speeds, of course, all right, because if you touch the camera, even if it's on a sturdy tripod, now this is on a sturdy base, that's why this is a little wobbly here. The lens doesn't touch the base that I have this on, so it's a little wobbly. If you're on a tripod, of course, it's not going to move like that. But still, if you touch the camera when it's on a tripod, there is going to be some slight movement, some slight vibration. So that's why you use a cable release to eliminate that. And the way you use a cable release, you screw it in, you notice I have it looped, okay? That is the best way to avoid vibration. So we're set to the B setting. At the bottom of the plunger on the cable release, you will notice this ring, and you notice I have it loosened. It's either can be tightened down, and when you do that, you just press the release, let go, the shutter opens and closes. However, when you loosen this, and most cable releases have a similar arrangement. Some, it's a little different than this, but they all basically have a similar type thing. Okay, so now, I'm going to cock the shutter, of course. I'm going to press the shutter release. The shutter opens, and it stays open until I press down on this ring. So that's a better way to use it if you're using a longer exposure. You just press the release, count off the time, 2, 3 seconds, whatever, use your cell phone or stopwatch, and then press this to close the shutter. Okay, so let's take that off. You also notice around the collar of the shutter release, there's an A on the left here and an R on the right. Okay, A is for advance, which you normally would have it set for. R is for rewind. Okay, so if you finish the roll, you're going to rewind film, you just turn it to R. Now most cameras, if you're familiar with 35mm cameras, have a button on the bottom. And what that does, as setting this to R does, it releases the sprocket inside so you can rewind the film. Okay, so one other thing with the shutter release, let's turn this back to A. All right, you also notice this red dot. As I operate the film advance lever, that dot rotates 360 degrees. All right, so what's so important about that? Why is that something we need to know? Well, when you're rewinding the film, it also revolves. Now, it's not going to revolve now because I have no film in the camera, but I'm going to load a roll in a little bit and I'll show you exactly how that works. But by noting that position, okay, so it always ends up in the same position when you advance the film, right? It goes 360 degrees. When you're rewinding the film, let's say you want to leave the leader out, you just note that red dot and it will turn as you rewind the film. When it stops turning, the film is completely rewound into the cassette except for the leader. So if you want to leave the leader out for whatever reason, that's one way to do it. Another thing you can do with that is bring the film back and make a second exposure on the same section of film. And I'll show you how to do that in a little bit. Okay, so now we come over to the advance lever. The advance lever has a 15-degree standoff position, and it takes 136 degrees to advance the film, cock the shutter, and operate the frame counter. You can do that in one single stroke or several shorter strokes. Also at the bottom is a film length reminder. We have it set for 36 now. You just move this little pin over to the right and it says 20. Film today is either 24 or 36. Back when the Nikon F came out, and for quite a bit after that, film came in lengths of 20 and 36 exposure. Okay, so that's it for that side of the camera. Let's come over to this side. Of course, we have the standard rewind knob and crank, okay, which we use when we rewind the film. It has an arrow pointing in the direction that you should turn it. The rewind knob on the Nikon F, you notice it does not raise up, and I'll show you why in a little bit. There's also a Nikon accessory shoe, I guess we'll call it, around the rewind knob. It will take certain Nikon flash units, will just slide right into it, and there's a contact here, so they will fire the flash without having to plug it in. But also, certain of Nikon's flash units require what they call a flash unit coupler. This was one of the original ones. It slides right into the shoe. It gives you a standard flash shoe, but you will notice there is no contact in the center. So a hot shoe flash would not fire. You would need to plug it in to the front of the camera. It does have a contact here for certain of Nikon's flash bulb units, okay, which are long, long out of production. The reason Nikon did it this way and didn't put a shoe on the prism was because the viewfinders on the Nikon F are interchangeable. And Nikon didn't feel it was secure enough to put one on top of the prism. So they went this route. It wasn't until the Nikon F4 that they actually put a shoe on the prism. Okay, it was a more secure, they came up with a more secure mounting system for the prisms. All right, so let's go to the front of the camera now. Let's do it this way. Okay, and we have a depth of field preview button. You press that button, the lens stops down to the preset aperture. That is so you could observe depth of field on the viewing screen. Now, you will notice something. The lens is wide open now. It's at its maximum aperture, even though I have it set for 5.6. That is because this is an auto lens. You'll notice it says Nikkor H Auto. And the lens remains at maximum aperture until the moment of exposure. When you press the shutter release, let's put a slow speed so you can observe that. See that? Had a lens stop down to the aperture you set. That's to give you maximum brightness on the viewing screen as you're taking pictures. Okay, so back to this side. We also have a mirror lockup switch. Okay, right now the black dot matches up with the black dot. We turn it so the black dot on the switch lines up with the red dot. All right, and we need to fire a frame. Let's just set it to a faster speed. Okay, and the lens is now stopped down to the aperture that you set, and the mirror is up. Okay, to bring the mirror back down, you simply turn that ring back to so the black dots line up. Now, why would you use that? The mirror flipping up and down causes vibration. Even though the camera's on a tripod, you're using your cable release. So if you're using the longer exposures, you know, a second, 2 seconds, whatever, it's best to lock up the mirror. The problem with the Nikon F, as far as mirror lockup is concerned, is when you lock up the mirror, you are wasting a frame. Okay, because you have to press the shutter release in order to get that mirror to go up and stay up when the switch is set properly. So the Nikon F2 solved that issue. Another reason to lock up the mirror is if you were using certain lenses that mounted, the rear element actually went into the mirror box. They had an extended rear element that went into the mirror box, such as the 21mm lens that came out when the Nikon F was introduced, and certain other fisheye lenses. Okay, also on this side of the camera, one second. All right, also on this side of the camera, we have the self-timer. So you just bring this lever down. Let's make sure we have the shutter cocked. Press the button, and it will fire. It can be set from 3 to 10 seconds, and from the 3-second point to the 10-second point, you could set it anywhere in between. You can't set it below 3 seconds. Now, if you decide you're going to, you want to use a self-timer, and then you decide, you know what, I'm not going to use a self-timer. Just go ahead and take the picture. Self-timer, nothing will happen. Then once you have taken that picture, just press the button. Remember, do this before you cock the shutter, and the self-timer will just go back to where it was. You don't have to, you won't waste the frame. Okay? All right, so, another reason to use the self-timer is if you don't have a cable release and you're using a longer exposure. Okay, just to avoid that vibration. Remember, even though the camera's on a tripod and you touch the camera, there's a possibility of some vibration, some movement. Okay, so let's go over to the other side of the camera. We have the lens release button, and the way that works, you simply press it, turn the lens to remove it. There's a small pin here that retracts when you press the button in, that connects to the lens to keep it from coming off. Okay, now let's see, we're going to come over here and we have our flash sync terminal. This would be used if you had a non-hot shoe flash or studio flash, whatever, it plugs in here. On the back of the camera, we have our viewfinder. You will notice it's rectangular in shape. Later Nikon viewfinders went to a circular opening, which took threaded accessories. There is an adapter for this viewfinder that slides in to take those threaded accessories, such as an eyepiece magnifier, rubber eye cup, and a few others. Also, you'll notice there's a button here. We press that in. It's best to use a pen. We just press that in with the pen, and we can remove the prism. It took many other viewfinders. I will go over them in a future video on the various viewfinder accessories for the Nikon F. The focusing screen is also interchangeable. In order to remove that, simply turn the camera over and make sure it's on a soft surface. This is rubber, so it's fine. Just press that button in and the viewfinder screen pops out. This is the standard screen that came with the Nikon F. It's called an A screen. There were many others over the years. I think eventually, by the time the Nikon F2 was introduced in 1971, there were approximately 20 different screens for use with various focal length lenses, various lighting conditions, high magnification work on a bellows, whatever. There was a screen for every situation. This A screen has a 12 millimeter matte central area, and the very center has a split image rangefinder. Okay, to place the screen back in, we just drop it in from the right side of the camera as you would be holding the camera for use. Okay, and then we just press back on that same button we did to release it, and it drops back in, and the viewfinder just pops back in. Okay, one other thing I forgot to mention when I was going over the top of the camera. This is the serial number of the camera. If you drew an imaginary line across the top of the serial number, that is the focal plane. For high magnification photography, certain types of specialized work, you may need to know that, and that's where it is. Okay, so now we're going to go to the bottom of the camera, and you will see we have the key to open the back, to remove the back. We'll get to that in a second. We also have a tripod socket and a film type reminder, which has no effect. It just basically allows you to remember what type of film you have in the camera. It has a black arrow for black and white film, a red arrow for color. There's an E here, so if the camera's empty, you just set it that way. So if you're going to use color film, you just set that 400. That's 400 speed color, opposite the red arrow. Later cameras, this only goes up to 400 speed film because back then that was about the fastest film that was available. Later versions of the F go up to 1600. All right, so now we're going to load film. I'm going to actually load a roll of film. All right, but you want to make sure the camera's empty, right? One way to do that, probably the best way to do that, is to unfold the rewind crank and just give it a little push. If it's turning easily without any resistance, the camera's empty. All right, so now we're going to open the back. When we open the back, it also resets the frame counter to a couple notches below 0. Okay, now this is one of the features of the F that a lot of people didn't like, and that was changed when the F2 came out, in that the back was completely removable. So what do you do with the back if you're in a crowd, or if you're trying to run down the street and load film? Made it a little difficult. You have to slip it in a pocket, whatever, throw it into your camera bag. That was rectified in later years. You also notice one other thing, just one other thing I should mention. There are no contacts here for a motor drive. This camera did take a motor drive. That was all in the interchangeable back. When you bought the motor drive, the camera was sent to Nikon and Nikon repair facility, and they adapted the camera for that motor drive. And this back, you just put aside because the motor drive had its own back. Okay? All right, so to load film. No need to push up on the rewind knob. Well, you can't, but you don't need to because you just slide the cartridge in. Okay? Now, I usually keep a finger on it to keep it from sliding back down a little bit. And this particular model of the F, one of the early versions, only had a single slot in the take-up spool. Later models had 4. Okay, so you just advance the film a little bit, and what you want to make sure of is that the sprocket holes, I hope you could see this, I know it might be a little difficult to see. You want to make sure that the sprocket holes on the film connect top and bottom with the sprocket holes on the sprocket drive in the camera. Now you notice there's a little bit of slack here, so I'm just going to turn that rewind knob slightly. Okay, all right, so everything looks good, right? I'm going to take the back of the camera, slide it in, and then turn the key and lock it down. Okay, now we'll turn the camera back this way. Now, what I do is leave the rewind crank open, okay? Leave the crank part up. And now we need to make a couple blanks. All right, well, we had advanced it partially. That's why it was just a short throw. So now we're going to make one. Now, I want you to notice something. The rewind crank is turning as I make those blanks. If the rewind crank is turning, now we'll fold it back down. That means that the film is loaded properly. If that rewind crank is not turning as we advance film, that means the film did not catch on the leader. So that's real important. When I was first starting out in photography, there was a fire at the end of my block. I was running down the street loading film into the camera, and I took what I thought were all these great pictures. Well, the film never caught in the take-up spool. And that never happened again because I always made note of the rewind crank as I loaded film. Okay, so we make a couple blanks, right? And now we're ready for the first picture. All right, and you can see that our frame counter is on number 1. Now, I want to show you about this red dot and how to use that in order to make a double exposure if you so choose. All right, so let's do this. We're going to take our, wait, you know what I want to do? I want to put this is a good roll of film, and I'm going to put my cap on it and also pick a very high shutter speed just in case some light gets in there. All right, so I'm going to, let's say you want to do, again, a double exposure. So let's take the first picture. Okay, now don't advance the film. Okay, what you want to do is turn your AR dial to R. We're now going to rewind that film, okay, back by noting the position of the red dot. Remember, it turns 360 degrees when you advance the film. It also will turn 360 degrees if you rewind the film back 1 frame. So we're going to note the position and then turn the rewind crank. You see the red dot turning, and I think that's about where it was, right? Okay, now we turn the AR back to A. We're now going to pull that film back to where it started in the film plane. Okay, and you will notice it's back where it started. And now we take our second exposure and then just proceed normally. It's not precise. If you really need to make a double exposure with a Nikon F, that's probably the best way to do it. Okay, so now let's just throw a little more so we have some film to rewind. All right, so now it's time to, you're at the end of your roll, you took 36 great pictures. You now turn this to R, and we're going to leave the leader out. Okay, so we're going to unfold the rewind crank and just turn it watch the red dot. You'll also hear kind of a click when the leader disengages. But, all right, I don't know if you heard that. But notice now the rewind crank, the dot on the shutter speed dial stopped revolving. So now we could safely open the camera back and the leader will be out. Okay, just like we started. One other thing while we have the back off, the shutter on the Nikon F is made of titanium foil. It is very durable. These cameras have been tested. It varies in where you get your information, anywhere from 100,000 to 200,000 actuations before failure. So it's a very durable shutter, but you don't want to touch it. You can damage it if you touch it, so just avoid touching it. Okay, so this was the first model of the Nikon F with the standard prism finder that was introduced in 1959, and the camera with standard prism finder would be available throughout the production run of the Nikon F. And in 1962, they came out with their first meter prism finder. But that meter prism finder, as well as the others, there were several, as well as other accessories, will be the subject for my next video. So if you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel and tap that bell so you'll be notified anytime I publish a new video. And I'll be publishing a new video every Wednesday morning. So thanks for watching.